Hi there, my name is Joshua Johnson and I'm with Creative Market. Today we're kicking off a brand new series on learning to be a web designer. If you want to be a web designer, one of your first questions might be, where do I start? How do I begin? Now a lot of people might tell you to begin with HTML and CSS, but I think that's putting the proverbial cart before the horse. There are lots of people out there who know HTML and CSS that call themselves designers, but they're actually really bad designers. This is because they never had a solid foundation in design. In my opinion, if you want to be a web designer, before you learn to write a single line of code, you need to learn some solid foundational principles that'll get you started with design. Over the course of this series, we'll cover all kinds of great concepts that will help you learn how to be a designer. But before we go over any hardcore design principles, we'll use this lesson to cover 3 common misconceptions about design. The first common misconception about design is that it's about making things pretty. This couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, a lot of the times, good design is actually pretty boring. Imagine you made a beautiful website that gets you to the #1 spot on Dribble, but it doesn't meet any of the client's needs. Now, can you call that a good design? Sure, it looks great, but it's not necessarily a good design. Always remember that valuing form over function will earn you a portfolio full of failures. Now, the second common misconception about design is that you either have it or you don't. And what I mean by that is that some people seem to think that design is something that you're born with. If someone ever told you that you're not particularly creative, then well, I guess you can't be a designer. But in reality, that's not the case. Whether or not you feel like you're a particularly creative person has nothing to do with whether or not you can be a successful designer. As it turns out, design is a discipline. Much like reading or writing, you weren't born with these skills, but you pick them up along the way. It's something that can be taught and learned. You'll find that most of the principles in design are actually pretty straightforward, and you'll pick them up pretty fast. So whether or not you're a creative person, you can still succeed as a designer, but you have to be willing to put forth the time and effort that it takes to do so. The third misconception about design is that it's easy. Once you learn the basic principles, really you just put them all together and then there you have it. You have a good design. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I remember when I was first learning design, I was so frustrated that I could follow all of the rules and still turn out a pretty crappy design. Sometimes you hit it out of the park on the first swing, but typically that's not going to be the case. So now that we've covered some common misconceptions about design, it's time to ask that basic question, what is design? I'll spare you the cliche of throwing out the Wikipedia or dictionary.com definition of design. You can look that up on your own. But what I do want to leave you with is a few important lessons about design. First is that design is goal-oriented. It sets out to complete a very specific set of tasks and is successful only if it achieves these goals. Second is that design is functional. Art can be abstract, interpretive, and even occasionally without any purpose whatsoever. Good design always does something. It turns a complicated and dangerous machine into something a teenager can drive. It helps 1 billion people from all over the planet converse and connect on a single site. It can even take a bunch of boring, ugly data and turn it into something that helps researchers save lives. Next is that good design is earned. Most people aren't born with the ability to make a functional and attractive website layout. It's a learned skill that never ceases to take time and effort, even after years of experience. Another important lesson is that design is not always beautiful or unique. Original design is rightfully hailed as impressive, but sometimes the absolute best thing for a client is to give them a website or app that's familiar and doesn't break any new ground. It turns out that familiarity and standard conventions reduce learning curves for users. They're the reason most people instinctively know to click the site's logo to go back to the homepage, or look for a login button at the top right of a website. The final lesson is that design is powerful. Good design can partner up with art, technology, and nature to make the world a better place. Sometimes it's beautiful enough to make someone cry, or groundbreaking enough to change everything. But it can even be dangerous enough to ruin lives. Design is a responsibility, and one I hope you'll take seriously. I consider myself to be a lot of things. I'm a writer, I'm a photographer, I'm even a musician. But one thing that I typically hold above all others is that I'm a designer. Being a designer is an immensely fulfilling and empowering thing. It makes me a better writer, photographer, and even musician. It changes the way that I look at the world, and I know it will for you too. So I want to end with some simple words of encouragement. You can be a designer, and it's going to be awesome. Well, that's it for now. Be sure to check back next time for our first important design principle. Until then, check out creativemarket.com for awesome website themes, fonts, graphics, and more. I'll see you there.